All right, so the first fly that I want to show you, I'm going to show you a couple of flies, and we have these broken up in separate videos, so it's a little easier for you to access those. But the first fly I want to show you is one called a woolly bugger. Woolly bugger is the #1 fly kind of all time. There's one creeping up on there that was invented in about 1989 called a Clouser minnow, but the woolly bugger can catch any species of fish. I've used this to catch anything I've ever fished for, all the way from steelhead and silver salmon to trout to bass to panfish, whatever kind of fish people catch. Have caught every kind of species of fish on this fly. And it's a great fly to learn because it teaches you a number of techniques that you need. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our hook into the vise and position it properly so that that's parallel with the table. Then I want to start my thread, and one good clue or good hint, put it that way, when you're first starting to tie is to start your thread about one hook eye gap behind where the hook eye ends. So you're leaving this little blank piece of hook right there. What that does is it gives you some space. If you tie up to that, that will keep you from crowding the eye of the hook. The number one mistake that beginning tiers do is that they end up crowding the eye of the hook. So we want to prevent ourselves from doing that. So I started the thread there. Once I get it wrapped down pretty good, I'm going to cut that loose. And I'm going to take the thread all the way back here to where the straight part of that shank runs into the bend of the hook. So I'm just wrapping thread on there. And when you get near the point, you might want to angle the way that you put that on there so you're not catching the point with your thread. So now we're at the tie-in point where we're going to start building our fly. And the first thing that we're going to do is put a tail in it. The proportions on a woolly bugger are just like the proportions on most any fly that's tied. And for the tail, we're going to use some marabou. I'm going to do one in olive. That's just happened to be what I had sitting around. Black one might be a little better. They both work really well. So this is called strung marabou. Marabou is like the down from a turkey. So all those turkeys that you eat at Thanksgiving, they have all these white down feathers. They collect them, they dye them, and then they sew them together. When you get materials that are like this, don't be pulling stuff out of the middle. It just ruins this whole stitching together thing. So it's nice that they stitch it together. It makes it kind of easy, to keeps them all under control. So go here to one of the ends and you want to find a chunk of this marabou. Sometimes a little tough to get out, but you just want to, grab some and pull it out so that you have a nice chunk of feather here. All feathers have a stem in the middle, this little hard stem. We want to avoid that. Now, feathers also grow depending on the kind of feather. A lot of them, the length of these barbs, feather barbs coming out the side, are the same if they go directly out the side, but they end up, kind of living like this. So what we want to do is hold on to this and pull all this stuff directly out to the side. And by doing that, what it does is it gets the tips of all those feathers kind of lined up in the same position. So I typically just grab a chunk here in the middle, holding onto the stem with my right thumb and index finger, and kind of pull that out to the side. And then I'm going to clamp down on it pretty hard with my left hand. And we want a decent sized chunk of that. Now at this point you could tear it off of the stem or you can clip it off of the stem. Sometimes I like clipping it because it disturbs them less. So if we pull this through in our hand, we'll see that almost all those tips end in the same place. And this is the part that we want as the tail. You'll see how floppy this stuff is, how it waves around in the air. When it gets wet, it does the same thing in the water. That's part of the success of this fly, is that this moves a lot in the water, and so fish think that it's alive. We don't know what it imitates. It can be used as a leech, as a tadpole, whatever. I try to kind of compact the material by pinching opposite directions with my fingers. So I'm going to go this way, then this way, then this way, and that kind of compacts all the material into a small, tight little spot. The length of the tail should be the length of the hook shank. So I just kind of put it up there and measure it. I'm holding it in my right hand, and by twisting my fingers like this, I can actually adjust the length of that. So I'm going to, adjust the length right here, and then I'm going to grab it in my left hand. I now have it pinched together in my left hand, and this is the tie-in point right there, because that's where I matched my fingers. So I'm going to put that directly over where my thread is hanging down. Well, at this point, I'm going to use something called a pinch technique, which is just lift your thread up, and you want to put it in between your thumb and index finger and pinch on the thread. And now you've got this slack on the thread, and you can still see the slack right there. And I just want to get my bobbin down here, and I'm going to pull the thread out of my fingers down against the material. That keeps the material from rotating. Now, keeping tension on the thread, I want to put it back up here between my fingers, pinch it, come around here with loose thread, pull down, pinch technique in, and then I'm going to put a couple of wraps right on top. At this point, I want to keep tension on this. I'm going to move all this up out of the way, pull it backwards, and I'm going to take a couple of wraps of the thread right on that base that I built earlier. What that does is it leaves a little tension on the thread so this stuff doesn't come loose and rotate. At this point, all this other stuff on top that was in front of where we tied it in is the part that we're going to clip off. So I like to take my scissors. I always clip on the top of the fly so you don't accidentally cut your thread. Just lay your scissors right on the top of the thing and clip it off. So now we've got a tail built. If your tail's too long, you don't want to use your scissors to cut it off. It'll look too blunt and it won't look natural. These little feather barbs come out and they get finer and finer as they go. So we like using those. Or if it's too long, you can use your nails, pinch on it and just tear it off, and that'll give it kind of more of a jagged appearance. So that's our tail. Now we're going to take our thread back to where we tied the tail in. So just wind back and get right back at that same point where we tied in. And we now want to find a piece of saddle hackle. So this is saddle hackle. You can buy it dyed in all kinds of colors. You can even buy saddles with the feathers still on there. For woolly buggers, we like this kind of not really high quality hackle. Got a lot of web and stuff in it. And again, it's strung. So I'm going to go out here and find a piece that looks pretty nice for what I'm looking for. Here's one. So I'm just going to pull that out of where it was sewn together. So if you can see this, right in here there's this webbing, so it actually looks sort of opaque. Where there's not webbing, it looks a little bit more translucent. The more opaque there is, the softer the hackle is and the more it will pulse in the water. So if you're tying one of these for the river, you would want to use stuff that's a little stiffer because of the current. It's going to flatten it down. If you're fishing in a lake or some still water, you might want stuff that has a little bit more web. I like ones that look like this, where they're a little bit stiff back here and then they get some webbiness up here. But that's a saddle hackle. So we're going to tie this in by the tip. So I'm going to grab the very tip. This is the tip of the feather and this is the base. I'm going to grab this by the very tip, and I want to just kind of pull down on it. And what that's going to do is stand, and I know this is pretty hard to see, but that's going to stand those barbs up. And then I want to fold them back. So now I have a little spot right in here where some are going that way and some are going this way. That's where I want to tie it in. So I'm going to get that all set up in my hand right here. Put it right in the same spot. Use the pinch technique to get it right where you want it. And then put a couple wraps around it. You can wrap it down all the way up to the front if you want. If you got little pieces hanging out, just clip them off. And we're going to leave this out the back. So in tying flies, the thing that goes on top of the fly usually is the first thing you tie in, so you can build other stuff up and then put that on over the top. So this is going to be the last thing that we tie down on the fly. The next thing that we need is some chenille. They make sweaters and stuff out of this. It's just like velvet that's twisted between a couple strands of thread. Now, because it's twisted between a couple strands of thread, it's got all this velvety stuff. I like to grab this little end right here and just kind of use my finger and thumbnail to pull it out, so I just have the strands of thread sticking out. Those are what I want to tie in. If I tie in back here someplace, then I got a big chunk and it's going to cause the fly not to look real even. So I just want those little strands of thread. So now I'm going to take my thread right back to that same tie-in point, where I tied in my tail and my saddle hackle. And I'm going to use the pinch technique and put those little strands of thread right up on top. And at this point, I'm going to try to trap those down as well as possible. I'm going to just bring my thread all the way up here to just behind where I started it. Because as I do some stuff, it's going to start crowding that. So I'm trying to leave myself a little gap there so I make sure that I have a good head and a good spot to whip finish. Now we're going to take the chenille that we put on and we're going to wrap it around the hook shank exactly like you would wrap the thread. And you want to go the same direction. If we wrap the other direction, when we go to tie it off, it actually loosens it, and you don't want your fly coming unraveled. So always wrap stuff the same direction. So I'm just laying one down right in front of the next so that I get this nice even body that you see happening. When I get up to where my thread is, I'm going to lift that up and just grab my bobbin with my left hand and throw it over it. Do it once and twice. Pull down a little bit to get some tension, take a couple wraps in front of it, hold that up on top and cut it off. So now I've got a nice looking body. Now I'm going to take my saddle hackle and I want to spiral it through the chenille that I just did and go about the same, like in between each wrap of chenille that you did. So on this, in this case, you're maybe wrapping a 1/16 of an inch forward in each spiral wrap. And I'm just going to wrap all the way to the front of the fly. And when I get right up here to where my thread is, I'm going to do, 2 or 3 wraps of that hackle in exactly the same spot. And you'll notice that I'm kind of getting into the webby stuff at this point, which is great. Now I'm going to lift that feather up. I'm holding it with my right hand. I'm going to take my bobbin with my left hand and go over the top, go over it a couple of times, switch hands, kind of pull so I have some tension. I'm going to pull that back and put a couple wraps here to lock it down, and then I'm going to clip this feather off. And now all I have left to do is to tie a head and my whip finish. So what I'm going to do is just start building my thread up right on the hook eye and go back right to where that hackle is. And I kind of like to pull all that stuff backwards. And I'm going to build a nice tapered head. So it's going to be bigger back here toward the fly, and it's going to taper up kind of small in the front. We go back here, get a little bit more on here. And now that I'm back where I want to be, I'm going to tie my whip finish. So again, we've shown you how to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nice 5 wrap whip finish. Pull your thread good and tight. When I go to clip this off, if you use your scissors and clip, you'll cut anything that's in their way. But if you put a little gap in your scissors and you find the thread with it, put it up against the fly and just push with some tension on the thread, it'll cut the thread, but it won't cut anything else. So this was tied on a size 8 with a 2 extra long shank and extra heavy wire, which is the choice that I would use for these flies. It gives you enough hook gap to hook a fish. You can tie them in any size. I've tied them down as small as 16s. Sometimes fish like a little tiny woolly bugger, sometimes they like really big ones. So I tie it in all sizes, colors. Most common color, black, probably number 1, olive, number 2, brown, maybe number 3, you might go in between there. You can even mix it up and do like black with green body, whatever, but super versatile fly, great one to learn how to start with, and that's what it looks like when we're all done.